The soft glow in the nursery wasn't just from the dimmable, star-shaped lights Victor had installed. It came from Aurelia Grant, radiant at 9 months pregnant, humming a lullaby to the precious bump nestled under her cashmere sweater. He watched her from the doorway, his heart a painful knot of adoration and deceit. He'd promised her forever, a life as perfect and serene as this room they had built together. But forever was a fragile thing, and it was about to shatter into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces, because a few miles away, another woman was looking at a different kind of picture, an ultrasound, and she was on her way over. The last rays of the Pacific sun bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Palisades home, casting long, dramatic shadows across the Italian marble. It was the golden hour, Aurelia Grant's favorite time of day. It was when the world outside seemed to pause, holding its breath before sinking into the cool embrace of evening. She sat on the plush, cream-colored sofa, a hand resting protectively on the taut swell of her belly, where their daughter, soon to be named Nola, was performing a gentle ballet. Every flutter, every kick, was a miracle that still brought a gasp of wonder to her lips. Victor found her there, a silhouette against the fiery sky. He came to stand behind her, his large, warm hand settling on her shoulders, kneading the tension she hadn't realized she was holding. "You look beautiful," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his lips lingering. The scent of him, subtle, expensive cologne mixed with the clean, unique scent that was just Victor, was her anchor. "She's active tonight," Aurelia said, her voice soft with contentment. She tilted her head back to look at him, her love for him reflected in the warm depths of her hazel eyes. At 42, Victor Wolfe was a man sculpted by ambition. He had built his tech empire from nothing, a fact that clung to him like a second skin, an aura of power and unshakable confidence. But with her, he was different. He was tender, attentive, the man who remembered she preferred peonies to roses, and who had learned to make her favorite lemon risotto from a difficult Italian recipe. "She's just getting ready for her grand entrance," he said, his smile not quite reaching the intense blue of his eyes. He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced idle circles on her skin. "Everything is ready. Her room is perfect. The best doctors are on standby. Everything is under control." It was his mantra. Everything is under control. It was what had made him a millionaire 10 times over, and it was what, she believed, made their life so secure. But tonight, the words felt different. They carried a brittle edge, a frantic undertone she couldn't quite place. She saw him glance at his phone, lying face down on the polished oak coffee table. A nervous tick, a subtle clenching in his jaw. "Is everything okay at work, darling?" she asked gently. "You seem distracted." He blinked, his focus snapping back to her. "What? No, everything's fine. Just a merger detail I'm trying to iron out. Nothing for you to worry about." He squeezed her hand, a gesture meant to reassure, but it was a fraction too tight. "You should be resting." Doctor's orders. Later that evening, he drew her a bath, filling the cavernous tub with lavender-scented oils that filled the steam-filled room with a calming aroma. He helped her in, his touch careful, reverent. As she soaked, he busied himself in their walk-in closet, ostensibly choosing his suit for the next day. She could hear the faint, muffled tones of his voice. A phone call. His voice was low, urgent, stripped of the gentle cadence he used with her. She heard clipped phrases, words like unacceptable and handle it. When he returned, the mask of serenity was perfectly in place once more. He helped her from the tub, wrapping her in a ridiculously soft towel, and led her to their bed. He was the perfect husband, attentive to her every need. Yet a tiny, insidious seed of doubt had been planted. It was a feeling she couldn't articulate, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the drop in pressure before a storm. He insisted they visit the nursery one last time before bed. The room was a masterpiece of understated luxury. A hand-painted mural of a moonlit forest on one wall, a crib carved from pale Scandinavian wood, and a mobile of delicate, hand-blown glass birds. Victor had overseen every detail. He pulled her into his arms in the center of the room, his chin resting on top of her head as they stood in the soft, ethereal glow of the star-shaped lights. He held her tightly, as if trying to physically weld them together. "I promised you a perfect life, Leah," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with an emotion she mistook for overwhelming love. "I promise, I'll never let anything hurt you or our little girl. Forever. You and me." Aurelia closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, of their shared life, of the future she believed was written in the stars. She clung to his words, to the solid feel of him, pushing away the dissonant note that had sounded in her heart. In the quiet of the nursery, surrounded by the tangible proof of their love and the promise of their child, it was easy to believe in forever. It was easy to believe that nothing could ever touch them. She was wrong. Forever was already a lie. The baby shower was an elegant affair, a testament to Aurelia Grant's impeccable taste and Victor's limitless budget. Their sprawling backyard, with its infinity pool bleeding into the azure horizon of the Pacific, had been transformed into a sophisticated garden party. White linens, cascades of peonies and hydrangeas, and the gentle melody of a string quartet filled the air. Friends and family, a curated collection of LA's elite, mingled on the manicured lawn, sipping champagne, sparkling cider for Aurelia, and cooing over the mountain of exquisitely wrapped gifts. Aurelia, draped in a flowing ivory dress that celebrated her pregnancy, felt like the serene center of this perfect universe. She moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, accepting compliments and well wishes, her smile genuine. Victor was her shadow, his hand always at the small of her back, a proprietary gesture that was both comforting and, for a reason she couldn't name, slightly suffocating. He played the part of the doting father-to-be to perfection, his laughter booming, his charm effortless. "You've truly outdone yourself, Leah," her mother, Margaret, said, her eyes sweeping across the scene with approval. "It's all just breathtaking." "Victor handles the grand gestures," Aurelia replied, leaning into his side. "I just pick the flowers." Victor beamed. "Only the best for my girls." He kissed Aurelia's cheek, a public display for their audience. But as he pulled away, his eyes darted towards the house, a flicker of that same anxiety from the night before. The afternoon wore on in a pleasant, sun-drenched haze. The gifts were opened: tiny designer shoes, a ridiculously expensive stroller, a first-edition set of classic children's books. It was a portrait of a charmed life, a life insulated from the harsh realities of the world. The illusion was flawless. And then the doorbell rang. It was a sound that shouldn't have been jarring, but it sliced through the gentle hum of the party with the precision of a scalpel. A few heads turned. Victor's entire body went rigid. He muttered something about checking with the caterers and started towards the house, his movements stiff and unnatural. A moment later, a figure appeared in the grand archway that led from the house to the garden. It was a woman Aurelia didn't recognize. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a sharp, dark pantsuit that was entirely out of place amidst the soft pastels of the party. She was beautiful, but it was a hard, polished beauty, all sharp angles and intense focus. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the crowd until they landed on Victor, who had frozen mid-stride. The string quartet faltered, a violin hitting a sour note. A ripple of confusion went through the guests. Aurelia felt a cold dread begin to creep up her spine. chilling the warmth of the afternoon sun. Who was this woman? And why did the sight of her drain all the color from her husband's face? The woman walked towards them, her heels clicking ominously on the flagstone patio. She moved with a sense of purpose that was unnerving. She ignored the curious stares, her gaze locked on Victor. "Delilah," Victor said, his voice strained, barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I think you know." The woman, Delilah, replied. Her voice was low and steady, but it carried an undercurrent of steel. She stopped a few feet from him, creating an invisible triangle of tension between them and Aurelia. "We need to talk. Privately." The party had fallen silent. The only sound was the distant hush of the ocean. Everyone was watching. Aurelia felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, their curiosity shifting to pity. Her cheeks burned with a humiliation she didn't yet understand. Victor, recovering his composure, forced a tight smile. "This isn't the time or the place. This is a private party." "And I have a private matter to discuss," Delilah countered, her gaze unwavering. She finally looked at Aurelia, a fleeting expression that was a complex mixture of pity and triumph. "It concerns all three of us." Aurelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She placed a hand on her belly, a primal protective gesture. This was not a business associate. This was not a lost guest. This was something else. This was the storm. "Victor," Aurelia said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Perhaps you should hear what she has to say." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Don't do this, not here." But it was too late. The porcelain perfection of their day had a hairline crack, and it was spreading fast. "My office," Victor said curtly to Delilah, gesturing towards the house. He turned to Aurelia, his face a mask of strained reassurance. "Leah, I am so sorry about this. It's a misunderstanding. A disgruntled employee. I'll handle it and be right back." He was lying. The lie was as plain as the terror in his eyes. He led Delilah into the house, leaving Aurelia standing alone in the center of her perfect party, the wreckage of it already beginning to settle around her. The string quartet, after an awkward pause, began to play again. But the melody was thin and mournful, a dirge for a life that had, in the space of a single heartbeat, ceased to exist. Victor's home office was his sanctuary, a fortress of solitude and control. Lined with dark mahogany bookshelves and furnished with stark, modern leather chairs, it was the one room in the house that bore none of Aurelia Grant's warm touches. It smelled of old books and power. Today, it felt like a cage. He shut the heavy door behind Delilah, the solid click sealing them in, shutting the rest of the world out. The muffled, cheerful sounds of the party seemed a universe away. He rounded on her, his voice a furious whisper. "Are you insane? Coming to my home, today of all days?" Delilah Keene did not flinch. She stood in the center of the room, her posture radiating an icy calm that infuriated him. She took in the details of the office, the awards on the shelves, the framed photo of him and Aurelia on the desk, smiling on a yacht in Santorini. Her expression was unreadable. "I tried your way, Victor," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth it had held when they were in bed together. "I called. I texted. You told me to be patient. You told me you would handle it. I'm done being handled." "Handling it doesn't involve you ambushing my pregnant wife at her baby shower," he shot back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it for the first time all day. "I told you I'd take care of you. I'll set up a fund, buy you an apartment, anything. Name your price, Delilah." It was the wrong thing to say. A flicker of something, hurt maybe, or just pure rage, crossed her face before being replaced by that unnerving composure. "My price?" she repeated, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. "You still think this is a transaction, don't you? Just another deal to be closed? Another problem to be solved with a wire transfer?" She took a step closer, and for the first time, he noticed the slight swell of her abdomen beneath the sharp tailoring of her blazer. It was almost imperceptible. but it was there. A gut punch of reality. "This is not a negotiation," she said, her voice dropping lower. "This is a fact, a biological fact, one that you helped create." Victor sank into the chair behind his desk, the strength suddenly leaving his legs. He felt the walls of his carefully constructed world begin to close in. "What do you want from me?" he asked, the words tasting like ash. Instead of answering, she opened her designer handbag and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She placed it on the polished surface of his desk and slid it towards him. It was a photograph, printed on cheap, flimsy paper. He stared at it, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. It was an ultrasound, a grainy black and white image of a tiny, developing life, a small, perfect spine, the unmistakable shape of a head, a fluttering heartbeat captured in a frozen moment. "I'm 16 weeks along, Victor," Delilah said softly. The quietness of her voice was more chilling than any shout. "That's 4 months. You can do the math." He could. Their mistake, their lapse in judgment, as he had framed it in his own mind, had not been a single night. It had been a feverish, 3-month affair, born of late nights at the office and a mutual, intoxicating hunger for success. He had ended it the day Aurelia told him their last round of IVF had finally, miraculously, worked. He had convinced himself he could compartmentalize it, lock it away in a box labeled past, and never look at it again. But the past was here, in black and white, on his desk. Is it mine?" The question was pathetic, a desperate last-ditch denial. Delilah's eyes narrowed. "Don't insult my intelligence, or your own. I haven't been with anyone else. This is your child." She leaned forward, her hands flat on his desk, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I felt her kick for the first time yesterday." "She has your eyes, Victor. I saw them on the 3D scan. The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. She has your eyes. The same thing he imagined when he looked at Aurelia's belly. He stared at the grainy image, at this ghost of a child he had never known he'd created, and felt a profound, sickening vertigo. His life, once a straight, ascending line of success, had just forked into 2 irreconcilable realities. "I will give you anything," he repeated, his voice hoarse. $1 million, $5 million. You and the baby will be set for life. You never have to work again. Just go away. Disappear. Move to another state." "I don't want your money, Victor," she said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. What she wanted was more than money. She wanted the life that came with it. She wanted legitimacy. She wanted what Aurelia had. "I want my child to know her father. I want her to have her father's name." The audacity of it staggered him. The threat was clear. This wasn't just about a baby. It was about a claim. A claim on him, on his life, on his name. The carefully managed control he prized above all else was slipping through his fingers like sand. He was no longer the powerful Victor Wolf, master of his universe. He was just a man, trapped in an office with 2 pregnant women and a future that was about to be burned to the ground. Aurelia Grant stood on the patio, a champagne flute of sparkling cider held in a hand that had begun to tremble. She watched the closed mahogany door of Victor's office, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. The party continued around her, but it was a pantomime of happiness. The laughter sounded forced, the music thin and reedy. Her guests, sensing the tear in the social fabric, kept their distance, casting sympathetic, curious glances her way. They were watching a play, waiting for the second act. A disgruntled employee. Victor's lie was clumsy, pathetic. In the 12 years they had been together, she had never seen him look so terrified. It was a primal fear, the look of a trapped animal. And it had nothing to do with business. She excused herself from a well-meaning friend, murmuring something about needing to check on the arrangements. Her feet carried her towards the house, moving with a will of their own. She was not a woman who made scenes, who eavesdropped, who suspected her husband of the worst. She was Aurelia Grant, poised, rational, trusting. But that woman was disintegrating with every step she took towards that closed door. As she entered the cool, quiet hallway, she could hear their voices. His, low and strained. Hers, calm and insistent. She couldn't make out the words at first, just the tense, rhythmic cadence of a confrontation. She slowed her steps, her heart pounding a deafening rhythm in her ears. She stopped a few feet from the door, hidden from the view of the partygoers in the garden, and held her breath. Insane. Coming to my home. That was Victor, his voice laced with a fury she had rarely heard. I told me you would handle it. I'm done being handled. The woman's voice was clear, cutting through the thick wood of the door. Aurelia pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself. The ice in her stomach was spreading, numbing her limbs. This was no employee. This was intimate, personal. This was a history she had no part in. Then Victor's voice again, desperate, bargaining. Name your price, Delilah. Delilah. The name hung in the air, foreign and sharp. Aurelia sifted through her memory, through years of company parties and charity galas. The name meant nothing to her. The woman was a stranger who was in her home on the day of her baby shower, making demands of her husband. She was about to turn away, to retreat back to the sunlit lie of the party, when she heard the woman's voice again, softer this time, but infinitely more dangerous. I don't want your money, Victor. I want my child to know her father. The words slammed into Aurelia with the force of a physical impact. My child? Two simple words. They rearranged the world. They took the beautiful, ordered puzzle of her life and scattered the pieces into a meaningless, chaotic jumble. She felt the air leave her lungs in a silent gasp. Her hand flew to her own belly, to the life within her, as if to shield her from the poison that had just seeped under the door. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. My child. It couldn't be. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Victor, her Victor, who had held her through every failed IVF cycle, who had cried with her, who had celebrated with unrestrained joy when they finally saw that tiny, fluttering heartbeat on the screen. It was not possible, and yet, it was the only thing that made sense. The distraction, the anxiety, the furtive phone calls, the terror in his eyes when Delilah had appeared. It was the key that unlocked the last few weeks of his strange behavior. The crack in the porcelain of her perfect life had just splintered, spiderwebbing across the entire surface until there was nothing left but 1,000 sharp-edged fragments. She backed away from the door, her movement slow, robotic. She didn't want to hear any more. She couldn't. She already knew the whole ugly truth. She turned and walked, not back to the party, but up the grand, sweeping staircase, her hand gripping the cool, smooth wood of the balustrade for support. Each step was a monumental effort. With every stair she climbed, she felt herself leaving her old life behind on the floor below. She didn't stop until she reached the nursery. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. The room was just as they had left it the night before, serene and filled with promise. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, carefree fairies. It was a room waiting for a life to begin, a room built on a foundation of love, a foundation that had just crumbled into dust. Aurelia sank onto the plush, gliding chair in the corner, the one where she had imagined herself nursing her daughter in the quiet hours of the night. She wrapped her arms around her belly, holding on to the only thing that felt real in this sudden, nightmarish landscape. The quiet hum of the party below was a world away. Up here, in the silent, sun-drenched room, there was only the sound of her own heart breaking. It could have been 20 minutes or an hour. Time had lost its meaning. Aurelia Grant sat motionless in the nursery, the silence broken only by the frantic thumping of her own heart. She watched the sun dip lower, the golden light turning to a bruised purple, and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but she knew something had to break. Finally, she heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, hesitant. The nursery door creaked open. It was Victor. His face was pale, his tie loosened, the carefully constructed mask of the charming host shattered. What remained was a man ravaged by a disaster of his own making. He saw her in the chair, and a look of profound relief, quickly followed by dread, crossed his face. "Leah," he began, his voice raspy. "There you are. I was worried. The guests are leaving." Aurelia didn't look at him. She continued to stare out the window at the dying light. "Is she gone?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was a terrifyingly calm sound. "Yes, she's gone," he confirmed, taking a tentative step into the room. "Listen, what you saw down there, it was nothing. It was a shakedown. She's an unstable former employee with a grudge. My lawyers are already handling it." He was still lying. Even now, with their world collapsing around them, his first instinct was to lie, to manage, to control the narrative. A wave of cold, clear anger cut through her shock. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Really looked at him. The man she had loved for 12 years was a stranger. "A grudge?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. An interesting choice of words. What exactly is her grudge, Victor? Did you pass her over for a promotion? "Something like that," he said quickly, seizing the lifeline she'd thrown him. "It's complicated, a messy HR situation." "I see." Aurelia's gaze was unwavering. She was a curator by training. She knew how to look at something, to see the truth beneath the surface, to spot a fake. And he was the fakest thing she had ever seen. "And this HR situation? Does it involve a child?" The color drained completely from his face. He flinched as if she had physically struck him. The lie died on his lips, leaving a gaping silence in its wake. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. He was caught. How did you hear that?" he stammered, his composure finally cracking. "You have a beautiful home, Victor," she said, her voice like ice. "But the doors aren't soundproof." She watched him crumble, the bravado, the power, the control, all of it dissolving until he was just a guilty man, exposed and pathetic. "Aurelia, I can explain," he pleaded, moving towards her. "It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake." "Stop!" she commanded, and the single word had more force than a shout. He froze. "Don't you dare come near me, and don't you dare call this a mistake. A mistake is taking the wrong freeway exit. A mistake is spilling wine on a rug. What did you do, Victor?" He finally broke. He sank to his knees on the soft, cloud-patterned rug, the powerful tech mogul reduced to a supplicant. "I had an affair," he whispered, the confession torn from him. "It was last year. It meant nothing. It was over before I even knew. Before we knew about Nola. I swear it, Leah. It meant nothing." "It meant nothing?" she echoed, a wild, hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "It meant nothing." "Victor, there is another woman, a woman I've never seen before, who felt entitled enough to walk into our home, into my baby shower, because she is carrying your child. I would say that means something." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I will fix this," he vowed, his voice thick with desperation. "I'll give her money. She'll sign an NDA. She will disappear from our lives, I promise. We can get past this. It can be you, me, and Nola, just like we planned." He still didn't get it. He thought this was a problem that could be managed, a threat that could be neutralized. He didn't understand that the core of their world, the trust that had been its bedrock, had been pulverized. He hadn't just broken a promise. He had revealed that their entire life, the one she had poured her heart and soul into, was a lie. "There is no us anymore," Aurelia said, the words feeling like shards of glass in her mouth. She stood up, her body aching with a weariness that went bone deep. She looked down at him. This man she had loved. This man she had built a future with, and felt a vast, empty chasm opening between them. "You didn't just have an affair, Victor. You brought a war to my door, and you expected me not to notice the sound of the guns." She walked out of the nursery, leaving him kneeling amidst the pristine, untouched symbols of a future he had just destroyed. She closed the door on the perfect little room, and on the man who had promised her forever. The hours that followed were a surreal, disjointed nightmare. The house, once a beacon of warmth and life, became a cold, silent mausoleum. The catering staff cleared away the remnants of the party with hushed, averted eyes. The string quartet packed their instruments and slipped away into the twilight. Left behind were the ghosts of celebration, half-empty glasses, plates of uneaten cake, and the oppressive weight of unspoken truths. Aurelia Grant locked herself in their master bedroom, the one place that had always felt like a sanctuary. Now, it felt tainted. Every object, the photograph on her nightstand of them laughing in Italy, the cashmere throw he'd bought her for her birthday, the very scent of the sheets, was a painful reminder of the lie she had been living. She lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, her body rigid with shock. Her mind, however, was a maelstrom. She replayed every moment of the last few months, re-examining them through the lens of this new, horrifying reality. Every late night at the office, every unexplained business trip, every time he'd seemed distant or distracted, it all clicked into place, forming a sickening mosaic of deceit. He had been living a double life. While she was injecting herself with hormones, praying for a child, he had been sleeping with another woman. While she was carefully, lovingly designing their daughter's nursery, he was creating another child, a secret one, a wrecking ball aimed at the heart of their family. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it was hard to breathe. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the calculated deception. He had looked her in the eye, day after day, and lied. He had held her, kissed her, whispered promises of forever, all while harboring a secret that had the power to annihilate her. Downstairs, Victor paced his office like a caged tiger. The initial shock had given way to a toxic cocktail of guilt, rage, and pure, unadulterated panic. His first call wasn't to a marriage counselor or a trusted friend. It was to his lawyer, a ruthless corporate litigator named Gabriel Pierce. "She has an ultrasound, Gabriel," Victor said, his voice tight, pacing the length of the room. "She claims the child is mine. She showed up at my house. My wife knows." Gabriel, ever the pragmatist, was silent for a moment. "How certain are we that the child is yours, Victor?" "She says she's certain. The timeline—" "It fits," he admitted, the words tasting like poison. "Okay, first, a DNA test, immediately. We don't make a single move until we have confirmation. Second, I'll draft an NDA and a settlement offer that will make her eyes water. We offer her a lump sum, monthly support, and a gag order so tight she won't be able to tell her own mother the kid's name. We bury this." Victor listened, nodding. This was familiar territory. A problem. A strategy. A solution. He could feel a semblance of control returning. He could fix this. He could throw enough money at the problem until it went away. He could protect his assets, his reputation, his company. But then he thought of Aurelia, locked away upstairs. He thought of the look in her eyes. Not fury, but a dead, empty finality. That was a problem money couldn't solve. The guilt was a physical weight in his chest, heavy and suffocating. He loved her. He truly did. How had he allowed this to happen? The answer was as ugly as the situation itself. He had been seduced by the validation. Delilah had looked at him not as a husband, but as Victor Wolfe, the visionary, the titan of industry. She was sharp, ambitious, and hungry, a reflection of his own younger self. She hadn't needed him to rub her feet at the end of the day or talk about baby names. She had wanted his power, and in taking it, she had made him feel powerful in a way he hadn't in years. It was a cheap, intoxicating thrill, and he had been weak enough to indulge in it, never once thinking of the cost. He was so consumed by anger, at Delilah for her timing, at himself for his stupidity, that he failed to see the bigger picture. He saw this as a PR crisis, a financial liability, a marital problem. He didn't see it as the moral cataclysm it was. His instinct was for damage control, not for atonement. He ended the call with Gabriel and stood in the silent office, looking at the photo of him and Aurelia on his desk. Her smile in the picture was so full of trust, so radiant. He had shattered that. He had taken the most precious thing in his life and ground it into dust. He had to talk to her, to make her understand. He left the office and walked slowly up the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence of the house. He stood outside their bedroom door, his hand raised to knock, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry" felt like a pathetic understatement. "I love you" felt like a lie. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the door, a wave of self-loathing washing over him. He had everything a man could ever want, a beautiful, intelligent wife who adored him, a child on the way, a billion-dollar empire, and in a series of selfish, reckless decisions, he had risked it all. The aftershocks were just beginning, and he was standing at the epicenter. The emotional earthquake that had ripped through their home triggered a physical one within Aurelia Grant. In the cold, pre-dawn hours, she was jolted awake not by a nightmare, but by a sharp, constricting pain that seized her entire abdomen. It receded, then came again, stronger this time. She knew with a terrifying certainty what was happening. She was in labor. 3 weeks early. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the numb fog of her grief. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Their carefully laid out birth plan, the calming playlist, the scented candles, the doula on standby, all of it seemed like a naive fantasy from another lifetime. She found Victor asleep in one of the guest rooms, his clothes rumpled, his face etched with stress even in slumber. She didn't want to wake him. She didn't want him anywhere near her. The thought of his hands on her, his voice murmuring encouragement, was repulsive. But the pain came again, a wave that stole her breath, and she knew she couldn't do this alone. "Victor," she said, her voice a strained whisper from the doorway. "It's time." He was awake instantly, his eyes flying open. For a moment, he was just her husband, his face a mask of concern as he scrambled out of bed. The baby? Now? He rushed to her side, his hands hovering, wanting to touch her, to support her. But she flinched away. The drive to the hospital was a study in surreal tension. Victor drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the road and Aurelia's pain-etched face. He kept murmuring apologies, a frantic, repetitive litany. "I'm so sorry, Leah, this is my fault. I'm so sorry." Aurelia didn't answer. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, focusing on her breathing, trying to ride the waves of pain. Each contraction felt like a physical manifestation of her heartbreak, her body trying to expel the trauma of the last 12 hours. The man beside her, the source of her agony, was now tasked with getting her safely to the hospital to deliver their child. The irony was so bitter, it made her want to scream. The hospital was a blur of bright lights, sterile smells, and the calm, efficient voices of nurses. They wheeled her into a private delivery suite, a room that felt cold and impersonal, despite its state-of-the-art amenities. A nurse tried to make small talk, asking about baby names. Aurelia couldn't bring herself to reply. Victor tried to play the role of the supportive partner. He offered her ice chips, wiped her brow with a cool cloth, tried to hold her hand. But there was a chasm between them now. A vast, unbridgeable emptiness. He was a ghost in the room, his presence a constant, throbbing reminder of his betrayal. During one particularly intense contraction, he tried to coach her breathing, his voice low and soothing. "Get out!" she gasped, the words ripped from her throat. He froze, his face stricken. "What?" "Get out!" she repeated, her voice raw with pain and fury. "I don't want you here!" A nurse gently but firmly escorted a shell-shocked Victor into the hallway. Aurelia was left with the medical staff, strangers who were more of a comfort to her than her own husband. She labored for hours, adrift on an ocean of physical and emotional pain. In the moments between contractions, her mind would flash with images. Delilah's cool, triumphant face, the black and white ultrasound, Victor's pathetic, crumbling confession. Then another wave of pain would crash over her, pulling her back to the brutal reality of the present. Finally, after an eternity of struggle, the moment arrived. With a final, primal cry that was equal parts agony and release, she brought her daughter into the world. The baby's cry, loud and healthy, filled the room. A nurse placed the tiny, wailing creature on her chest, and in that moment, the world fell away. There was only this tiny, perfect being, her daughter, Nola. She had a full head of dark hair, like Victor's, and when she finally opened her eyes, they were a deep, soulful hazel, like her own. Aurelia wept, tears of joy, sorrow, and overwhelming unconditional love all mingling together. This tiny person was the only thing that mattered. She was real. She was pure. She was hers. They allowed Victor back into the room a few minutes later. He approached the bed with a reverence that bordered on fear. He looked at the baby nestled in Aurelia's arms, his face a complex mask of awe, wonder, and profound regret. She's perfect," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He reached out a hesitant finger to touch Nola's tiny hand. Her fingers, impossibly small, curled around his. For a fleeting second, watching him look at their daughter, Aurelia felt a flicker of the old connection, a shared moment of parental love that transcended the wreckage of their marriage. They had created this miracle together. But the moment was fragile, and it shattered as quickly as it came. The love she felt for her daughter was pure and all-encompassing. The space where her love for Victor used to be was just a hollow, aching void. The birth of their daughter wasn't a bridge that would bring them back together. It was the start of a new, uncertain chapter, one she would have to navigate on her own. Aurelia Grant spent the next 2 days in the protective cocoon of the hospital, focusing solely on the tiny, demanding life in her arms. She learned the rhythms of her daughter, the sleepy, milk-drunk sighs, the surprisingly powerful grip of her tiny fingers, the piercing cry that signaled hunger or discomfort. For brief, blissful stretches, she could almost forget the world outside, the man in the chair across the room, the ruins of her marriage. Nola was her entire universe. Victor remained a constant, quiet presence. He slept on the uncomfortable pull-out couch, fielded calls from concerned family and friends with vague platitudes, and looked at his daughter with a heartbreaking mix of love and shame. He was trying, desperately, to hold on to the wreckage of his family. But he was a man adrift. He and Aurelia spoke only when necessary, their conversations limited to the practicalities of baby care. The silence between them was vast and heavy, filled with everything that had been broken. On the 3rd day, As Aurelia was nursing Nola in the quiet of the morning, her phone, which she had mostly ignored, buzzed insistently on the bedside table. It was a text from her sister, Rowan. "Don't look at the news, any of it. I'm on my way." A cold dread, by now a familiar sensation, washed over her. Her hand trembled as she reached for the phone. What now? What fresh hell could possibly await? Her fingers, acting against her own better judgment, tapped open a web browser. She didn't have to search. The story was everywhere. It was the headline from a notorious LA gossip blog known for its ruthless takedowns of the rich and famous. Tech tycoon Victor Wolf's baby mama drama, jilted mistress and newborn love child, left in the cold as wife gives birth. The blood drained from her face. Below the headline was a paparazzi photo of Delilah, looking somber and vulnerable, leaving a high-end baby boutique. The article was a masterpiece of calculated spin. It painted Delilah Keene not as a homewrecker, but as a tragic, sympathetic figure. A brilliant young lawyer who had fallen for her powerful, charismatic boss, who had promised her the world, only to abandon her when she became pregnant. It included quotes from an anonymous source, clearly Delilah herself, detailing Victor's frantic attempts to buy her silence, framing him as a cold, manipulative monster trying to hide his second family. The ultimate blow was a scanned image of a birth certificate, a baby boy named Victor Wolf Jr. born 2 days ago. Father, Victor Wolf. Mother, Delilah Keene. Aurelia felt the room spin. Another baby, a son. Born at the same time as her own daughter, the sheer theatrical cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just an affair, it was a parallel life he had created. Victor, seeing the look on her face, rushed to her side. "Aurelia, what is it?" He saw the phone screen and his face went ashen. Oh God, no. The betrayal was no longer a private agony contained within the walls of their home. It was public, a global spectacle. Her deepest, most personal pain was now fodder for gossip columns and internet trolls. Her humiliation was complete. She was no longer just a wronged wife. She was a public object of pity, a character in a sordid tabloid drama. The timing was no accident. Delilah had waited, allowed the birth of Nola to be Victor's moment of focus, and then she had struck, hijacking the narrative with devastating precision. She had been denied a place in his life, so she had carved one out for herself in the public eye, ensuring she could never be ignored or erased. The power imbalance had shifted dramatically. Victor was no longer the one in control. His phone began to ring, a frantic, incessant buzzing. It was Gabriel, his lawyer, then his publicist, then the chairman of his company's board. The story was a PR nightmare. But it was more than that. It was a character assassination. And in the world of publicly traded companies, character was currency. His carefully curated image as a brilliant, stable family man had been incinerated. "Turn it off," Aurelia whispered, her voice a hollow shell of itself. "Leah, I didn't know about the baby boy. I swear," Victor stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "I'll fix this. I'll release a statement. I'll sue them for libel." "I don't care," she said, her voice rising with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She looked at him, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "I don't care about your company, or your reputation, or your other child. All I care about is her." She clutched Nola tighter, her baby a warm, living shield against the coldness of his lies. "You have brought this circus into our lives, and you have put her in the middle of it. This is the one thing I will never, ever forgive you for." The price of his lies was no longer just her heartbreak, it was this public disgrace, this inescapable stain that would follow their daughter for the rest of her life. He hadn't just destroyed their marriage, he had tarnished their child's future before it had even begun. 6 months later, the opulent Palisades mansion felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. The aftershocks of Victor's betrayal had reshaped their world into something unrecognizable. He and Aurelia Grant lived under the same roof, but were separated by a chasm of silence and pain. They were co-parents, business partners in the raising of a child, but the intimacy and love that had once defined them were gone, replaced by a fragile, carefully negotiated truce. The public scandal had cost Victor dearly. The board of directors at his company, under immense pressure from shareholders, had forced him to step down as CEO. He was still the founder, still a majority shareholder, but he was a king in exile, stripped of the daily power and adulation that had been his lifeblood. His days were now spent in endless, soul-crushing meetings with lawyers, navigating the two separate, messy legal battles he had created. Delilah was relentless. She had rejected his settlement offers, opting instead to fight for a precedent-setting child support arrangement and a legal acknowledgement of her son's place in the Wolf lineage. She was not just seeking financial security, she was seeking a permanent, undeniable link to Victor's world, a victory she could savor for the rest of her life. But Victor was changing. The humbling loss of his empire, the daily quiet rejection in Aurelia's eyes, and the unconditional, innocent love of his daughter were slowly eroding the arrogant, self-serving man he had been. He stopped trying to fix things with money and grand gestures. The problem was not external. It was inside him. He started therapy, not to win Aurelia back, but to understand the deep-seated insecurity that had led him to risk everything for a moment of ego-stroking validation. His redemption didn't come in a single, dramatic epiphany. It came in small, quiet moments. It was in learning to change a diaper without fumbling. It was in patiently walking the floors with a colicky Nola at 3 a.m. so Aurelia could get a few precious hours of sleep. It was in showing up, consistently. With no expectation of praise or forgiveness, he started talking to Nola, whispering to her about his own impoverished childhood, about the fear of not being enough that had driven him his entire life. He was confessing to his daughter in a way he could never confess to his wife. Aurelia, for her part, was finding her own path forward. After the initial storm of public humiliation had passed, she had found a surprising resilience within herself. She poured all her love and energy into Nola, creating a safe, peaceful bubble for her in the midst of the chaos. She also began to rediscover the woman she had been before she was Mrs. Victor Wolf. She started visiting art galleries again, her curator's eye reawakening. She began sketching, something she hadn't done in years. She was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding her identity on her own terms. She watched Victor's transformation with a detached, cautious curiosity. She saw the effort. She saw the genuine remorse that had replaced his initial panic. But the trust was gone, and she didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. Forgiveness felt like a distant, impossible mountain. One quiet Saturday afternoon, she found him in the nursery, sitting in the glider, with Nola asleep on his chest. He was just watching her breathe, his face softened by a look of pure, unadulterated love. He didn't hear Aurelia enter. "She has your determination," he said softly, without looking up. "When she wants something, she doesn't give up." Aurelia leaned against the doorframe. "She gets that from both of her parents." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were clear, free of the frantic pleading she had grown so used to. They were just sad and honest. "I know sorry will never be enough, Leah," he said, his voice low. "I broke our world, and I have to live with that. But I want you to know, seeing you with her, seeing how strong you are, how incredible a mother you are, it's the one good thing in my life right now. I don't deserve either of you." It was the first time he had spoken about his own failings without it being part of a plea for reconciliation. It was a simple, unvarnished statement of fact. Aurelia walked over and looked down at her sleeping daughter. She saw the dark hair, the tiny, perfect features. She was a product of love. but also of deceit. Her life would always be complicated. But she was here. And she was a miracle. Aurelia reached out and gently brushed a stray hair from Nola's forehead. Her fingers brushed against Victor's. For a moment, neither of them moved. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. But it was a crack of light in the darkness. A tiny, fragile moment of shared humanity, of two people bound together forever by the child they had created, finding a new, more honest way to stand together in the ruins. The future was uncertain, a path they would have to build one painful, hesitant step at a time. But for the first time, it felt real. The story of Victor, Aurelia Grant, and Delilah is a raw reminder that secrets are a poison that corrodes even the most gilded lives. It's a journey through the wreckage of betrayal to the difficult, uncertain path of redemption. What do you think? Can a love shattered so completely ever be truly mended? Or is a new beginning, built on the hard-won truth, the only way forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If their story moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a powerful drama, and subscribe for more stories that explore the complex and often heartbreaking depths of the human heart.